The warmer from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in mere minutes by Greg Waddell, who does great work over at Sleepers Media. We're going to be chatting with him about what we've all seen here in the transfer portal thus far, how he expects the Big Ten and Michigan to be operating moving forward, and some of the Michigan ads that we've seen thus far, as Michigan has been very rambunctious with adding Ade Mara, Yaxel Lendeborg, and so many others. So we're going to be chatting with him about that, and then additionally we're going to be taking a look at the entire landscape of college basketball as of right now and all that we've been seeing there. In the final segment, I'm going to get you guys a roundup of the news and notes in college basketball that we have seen over the last 24 hours, and if you skip a day of taking a look at the transfer portal, my goodness, it's just absolutely insane because we're seeing 100 million billion guys in there. So we are going to do our best to be able to be on top of that. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to on this podcast via the 5-star review. Going to have a lot of moving forward, just two-parters as well, because we don't have a lot to be able to take a look at in terms of recaps or anything like that. We're just taking a look at all of these moves, and we're just leaving the first segment open if you guys have anything with regards to questions as well. So I do want to be doing that for you guys, and always love having great guests on the podcast, and it is all powered by Edge Boost over at edgeboost.bet. When you type in the promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G, they'll match your first deposit of $25. They make sure that bettors have access to their funds 24/7, 365, because it's not credit. You're just utilizing an account in general. You're able to utilize cashback rewards. You're able to receive cashback rewards as you utilize Edge Boost as well. They make sure that you have your funds and that 100% of gambling transactions, they are all approved, and that's always nice. And I always make sure to approve all the guests on this podcast as well, just like Greg Waddell, who does great work over at Sleepers Media. You've seen him on the Field of 68. You've seen him as well over there at Bleacher Report, doing an amazing job, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Additionally, I know that he does some great work on the college football front as well. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at GWizzy, the number 12 all together. And Greg, always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Great to be here, sir. Good to know that you're still rocking in the offseason. Looking forward to talking college hoops with you.
Absolutely. Every single day in which there is a day on this face of planet Earth, we have to be taking a look at college basketball because, man, we've got ourselves a lot that is going on, and I know you are through and through a Michigan man, and we did see over the weekend Ade Mara, the 7'3" big man, who I think that we both agree, a little bit of a rough go of it to begin his career over at UCLA, found his footing a little bit towards the back half of last season. He signed with the Michigan Wolverines. How big is this for a Michigan team that, as we know, they were built through the big men last season around those Twin Towers, and I think that Mara has a lot of, shall we say, untapped potential that he was finally starting to find towards the back half of last season.
Yeah, I think you hit the big points. Untapped potential is certainly the sell on why you roll the dice on a kid like him, but hey, he's 7'3". They don't make many men in this sport. 7'3", and
on this planet.
Right, and Dusty May is a proven, what he's done with Vlad Golden, I don't think should be swept aside. I think, him going from Florida Atlantic to Michigan and bringing Vlad with him as the one guy, I think sort of, I don't want to say discredit it, but Vlad got a lot better from his last year at FAU to his last year at Michigan. And I feel like the consensus was just like, oh, he brought him with him. Like, what's going to happen next? And, like, he was a Dusty May product who, started at Texas Tech and wasn't good enough to play, ended up at Florida Atlantic with really a very similar resume to what Mara has done. And if you go to KenPom, similar player profiles, Vlad Golden's the second one to what Ade Mara was last year. So I think that's the sell. I'll be honest with you. I'm not the biggest Mara believer, but I think if you're Michigan here, you're basically trying to bring him in the hopes that he's some insurance at the front court spots behind Yaxel Lendeborg, behind a Merez Johnson, who I still think will probably start at the 5 for this team. And if we consider Mara like a backup center option for Michigan, I don't know that there are many backup centers with more upside in the entire country.
Yep, absolutely. The big men's, the forward spot, the big men in general for Michigan, that looks to be a very big strength for them, and they're going to have one of the best front courts in all of college basketball. But Greg, let's talk about what was really the big issue for Michigan, and I think that you'd agree with me. It was the turnovers from last season, and they're going to have a little bit of a new look backcourt, as I know that there are some guys that are going to be coming, some guys are going to be going. No longer are you going to be having Trey Donaldson from a season ago. And how do you take a look at that front court? Or how do you take a look at that guard position? Because we remember in Dusty May's last season over at Florida Atlantic, guys like John L. Davis and company were rock solid. And May, just like you were talking about how he's good at being able to help out these big men, he's done a good job with regards to guards as well. And I think that's going to be interesting to see how things take off in season number 2, because even if they're more like country average with regards to turnovers, I think that that could make this team very lethal if they could just get more clean possessions.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's going to look completely different than last year in theory with the shakeups that they made. They opted for Elliot Cadeau, and I think they opted out of Trey Donaldson, even though Donaldson really won them 4 consecutive games at the end of the season with a clutch shot every single time down the stretch. And that's the portal era for you. I was surprised to see that happen, but it also made sense to me the more I thought on it, because look, last year, he's not a guard. You would never call him a guard, but Danny Wolf was this team's point guard in the half court. That was how they played. They ran every single possession through a 7-foot guard, and their quote-unquote point guard, Trey Donaldson, was really a spot-up catch-and-shoot threat. And with Wolf out of the picture, I mean, we assume he's going to the NBA. That's the plan. And I don't know that Michigan could have survived without some sort of playmaking engine for next season, and that's where Elliot Cadeau comes in. I think, Dusty May was very eager to address the playmaking issue. I think that was his first priority this offseason, even before looking at big man options. And I think he was right to assess that in terms of what the roster needed in the post-Danny Wolf era. And look, I have questions on Cadeau. He's not my favorite player in the country. I am probably even overstating that. I mean, I'm just a huge skeptic of his time at North Carolina. I don't know how much upside is there. But the one thing you can't take away from him is that he truly is one of the best assist rate guys in all of college basketball. And he's been doing that on teams that haven't experienced success, that have had, quite frankly, too many guards that need the ball at once. So I think the hope here is that Dusty May has built a bunch of different teams, a bunch of different ways. And every single year, the common thread is that whoever he banks his developmental juice on, he usually wins with. I mean, Danny Wolf was not a proven commodity. That worked immediately. John L. Davis, Elijah Martin, Vlad Golden becoming what they became at FAU took a little longer time, but I mean, he deserves all the credit in the world for turning those guys into what they became. And I think the goal here is Elliot Cadeau, Yaxel Lendeborg. Those are probably the 2 guys that you really need to hit if Yaxel ends up in maize and blue. And I think, in theory, I can buy that as a concept, even though it'll look much different next season.
Yep, to your point about Cadeau, he might not be the same shot maker as some of the guys that Michigan had last season, but probably better at being able to take care of the ball as well, and that's what I do feel like Michigan truly needed from a season ago, as we do have Greg Waddell, who does such great work over at Sleepers Media, joining me on Coast to Coast Soups, and just looking at the entirety of the Big Ten, I feel like it's a conference that as a whole, they were trying to take a look at, shall we say, some of the deficiencies of this last season, and a lot of teams, they put in their work right away. Like we just mentioned it with Michigan, they've already made a bunch of pickups, and they're pretty close on the roster for this upcoming season, unlike a lot of teams where there's still a lot of hunting and gathering to be done by them. We know that Iowa was obviously able to make a very tremendous hire. I am very impressed by what they did with bringing in Ben McCollum. I do think that Darren DeVries is going to be rock solid over at Indiana. And how much do you think the conference as a whole with the Big Ten took a look at what we saw from last season, and they decided we know what we need and we are going to get this done early, and we're going to try to build as much chemistry as humanly possible in the offseason?
Well, the best team did something immediately right in those lines, which has me excited. That'd be Purdue. Purdue watched an entire season, I'll be blunt about it, go down the drain because they didn't have what they needed at the center spot. They could have won. I'll be honest, they could have won a national championship last year. I know that sounds crazy, but you had an All-American point guard, the best point guard in the country, and an All-American power forward, and a 40% shooter that started 3 years and started in a national championship game, and some pretty good bench pieces on the wing. You just didn't have a playable big man other than TKR, who's an undersized 4 to begin with. And they had no toughness. They had no rim protection. They had no rebounding. and they still made a Sweet 16, took Houston down to the very final second. So, I think Matt Painter, who has his own way of doing things, to say the least, was very cautious last summer to disrupt what he felt was his culture. And that came at the cost of leaving some holes on the roster, going all in on inexperience. And then obviously the Daniel Jacobson injury hurt and put them in that spot as well. But he addressed that immediately this year. And I give him credit for doing that, because it was not a guarantee that Braden Smith was going to come back. And it's not a guarantee that even if you have Braden Smith back, that you're going to be good enough to win a national championship in his final year. But make no mistake, you should be. I don't know how many teams in college basketball history have returned 2 All-Americans from the season before. That's what Purdue has for next season. And Oscar Clough was one of the earliest ads in the portal. He's one of the perfect ads that we've seen in the portal thus far. He answers every single possible thing that Purdue didn't have last season immediately, and you still have the upside of Daniel Jacobson returning from injury. So I'm excited for it. I think Purdue's the clear favorite in this conference. I think they've got an argument for being the number 1 team in the country next year, and I'm looking forward to watching what that team looks like.
Yep, that is going to be a fun team to be able to take a look at. And it's hard to say that there's anyone above Purdue right now. Obviously, we are very, very early on in the offseason, so we could see some very rash moves. We could see a team just be able to completely rebuild on the fly. We know that Illinois is not going to be sitting on their hands, because love or hate Illinois, they're a team that in this day and age in the transfer portal, they have certainly made some moves. And I do think that it's just an interesting conference in general to see how these teams do attack the offseason, because I feel like we were on this podcast like 24 or so months ago being like, wow, the Big Ten is being really left in the dust in terms of not making moves in the transfer portal. And while you mentioned Purdue, they're not going to be hitting the transfer portal like, say, USC with Eric Musselman, who they always bring in like 10 guys and everything like that. I do think that there's been a little bit of, shall we say, a philosophy shift with some of these Big Ten teams. A lot of them are going a little bit more offense oriented. And how much do you think it has been a case where the Big Ten has been looking at their deficiencies over the last few seasons, especially when they got so many teams in the NCAA tournament 2 and 3 years ago, really couldn't advance sans Purdue, and have been trying to really be able to reshape their image, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's hard as time goes on, because we're going on, I don't even know what it is, 25 years since this conference has won a national championship. But I believe they're still the number 1 conference in terms of teams they've put in the national championship game. They just have all lost once they've gotten there. And
Wisconsin lost that one in a sea of whistles. I'll never forget that one.
Yeah, right? Like there have been some heartbreakers. There have been some teams that just ran into fantastic all-timer teams, like the Michigan team that lost to the Jalen Brunson Villanova squad. I don't know. You can go down the list, but it's a conference that to me is defined by its depth and always has been. There may not be the one singular Duke Blue Devils program in this league, but Michigan State's one of the 10 best programs in the sport's history. Illinois, Purdue, and Michigan all have storied paths with resources right now and great coaches that you believe can lead them to the promised land. Indiana's obviously one of the more resource-heavy programs, and if they make the right hire, which who knows, maybe they did, they can get back to what we all want them to be. So I think that was the story last year, right? They had 8 probably top 25 to 30 teams in the country, but no top 7 teams in the sport. And that played true. They didn't get anybody to the Elite 8, but they got a bunch of teams to the second weekend. And I don't know that I would say anybody in the league is thinking of it that way and trying to right their wrongs. What I will say is last year, there was a lot of talent in the league in a way that we haven't really seen. I mean, Jace Richardson's a lottery pick. Derek Queen's a lottery pick. Danny Wolf is going to be a first-round pick. There's different ways to acquire talent, and the Big Ten had a lot of it last year. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. 18 teams is still insane for a league. Every single year is going to feel different right now, but I've said it for a while, probably on this program with you before. The league has been running through Matt Painter and Brad Underwood. They are taking 2 very different approaches to building their programs right now. And I think Tom Izzo reminded people that even though Painter and Underwood have maybe had the last 3 or 4 years capitalizing on some Michigan State down years, there's one guy who's the first ballot Hall of Famer here. And if he can just get some talent, Jace Richardson 2.0 back in East Lansing, I think Michigan State has the culture to still be right in the mix as well.
Yep, absolutely. And I've noticed Michigan State with the few portal moves that they've made. They've been addressing the three-point shooting, which I do think was the main kryptonite that you had with them last season as well. So that has been very nice to see. And I do think that overall the Big Ten is in rather good shape. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see what we do get out of the Big Ten this season, because I'm not sure how you viewed this past college basketball season with the SEC getting just an insane 14 teams into the NCAA tournament. But I feel like that was a little bit of a one-off. I think that we could both agree the SEC is not going to be going back to where they were in 2016, where they got 3 teams in the NCAA tournament, and one of them was Vanderbilt in the first 4. I don't think that we're going to be seeing anything quite like that, but I feel like the top heaviness of this past season was a little bit more of a one-off, and as so many people are fearing that college basketball is going to be dead for these teams that are outside like the top 10 and everything like that, I view last season as a little bit more of a one-off, and I do think that more of these teams and these conferences that have a little bit more depth, I do think that these teams that are more around the top 25 are going to have a bit more success than they did a season ago, where it was 4 clear top teams and then everyone else.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I'll throw Washington out as an example right now. I think Danny Sprinkle's a good coach. I think last year he was in over his head, and it's easy to get in over your
And
head.
let me throw in there one thing as well with Washington. I think that they learned that they can't just throw all their money at one guy and then just try to piecemeal everything together with pretty much scraps.
Right. And I mean, the sport's evolving like crazy. I mean, I could name probably half of the teams in this Big Ten conference who are approaching this offseason completely differently than they did last year for one reason or another. But the starting point is the fact that most of these schools all have a lot more money than they did a year ago. And a year ago, like the way the portal worked, if you had the funds for a $2 million player at the time, we thought it was smart to try and spend that on whoever the one guy was. And it didn't work. I think across the board, it didn't work. I mean, Kansas State did it, didn't work. Washington did it, didn't work. Rutgers did it, didn't work. So I think teams are readjusting. Teams are also, especially teams with new coaches, are getting their feet under them. Danny Sprinkle, Dusty May are guys that I think in year one were just trying to get 13 guys on a team. And in year two, they've had, 12 full months to go fundraise, make relationships with donors that are actually going to help them get what they need. And I think that's paying off right now. I love the Wesley Yates ad for Washington. I mean, in conference play last year, Wesley Yates at USC, 17 points a game, 50% from the floor, 40% from 3. He was their best player, and USC had a couple good weeks in the second half of their season. So to rip him away from another West Coast Conference team like that, I think that's a huge ad for Washington. They've had so many ads already. It feels like they have an entire new roster done 2 weeks after the season. And I think Sprinkle's done a really nice job, much like Dusty May has, sort of redefining his team's identity from year one to year two.
Yep, and to your point about Wesley Yates, a welcome back Potter situation, what we all like to call a boomerang transfer. Began his career over at Washington, goes on over to USC, comes back to Washington. And how much do you think that that might be a little bit more of the norm now in this day and age? Because I know that Nebraska is one of those guys as well, was playing over at Rhode Island. He decides that he's going to be coming back to school as well. And I think that that's such an interesting dynamic. And I know that Michi Johnson was another one of those guys last season for Ohio State as well. He began his career there, went to South Carolina, went back to Ohio State. I think that he might actually be going back to South Carolina as well, which that's just strange to say the least. But we have been noticing a lot of guys that they start their career at one program, they leave to be able to get more minutes, and then they return right back to the program that they were at.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see it more and more just because the portal numbers are getting gaudier and gaudier every year right now, and that's going to lead to more chaos just naturally. I think every year we're going to see more crazy things and more volume of those crazy things than we did the year before. We're seeing higher price points this year. We're seeing just more raw players in the portal. We're seeing, teams that don't want to be in the portal force their way into the portal because they need to use it now. And it's a constantly evolving situation. There's always going to be guys that regret decisions, that try to come crawling back to their ex, and programs will handle that differently. But the common thread here is that every single team in the country needs to build a roster, especially with the expanded roster spots, with 15 guys. And I don't think it's going to be easy to keep 15 players from one year to the next in this sport anymore, which means every single year there's going to be desperation from all parties involved.
Yep, absolutely. You've got some of these programs holding up the boombox saying, baby, come back. And Sometimes they actually do come back in this day and age of college basketball, and we always want to do that for you, Greg. Every single time we know that we haven't gotten you on the podcast in quite some time, we go outside with the boot box, hoping that you're able to come back, and somehow, some way, it works every single time, and I'm very appreciative of that because you do such great work. Let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
I appreciate it. You can follow us at Sleepers Media. Right now, we are just drowning in portal coverage. We're probably putting up roughly 20 different portal videos a day right now. Anytime there's a new player that's high profile, we break down his game and potential fits. We're reacting to commitments, reacting to any news along the way, final 3 lists, visits, things of that nature. So if you want to stay up to date on the portal, follow Sleepers Media, subscribe to us on YouTube, and little plug for our Bleacher Report show. Every weekday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, live in the BR app. You can catch me and Carter Elliott breaking down the latest and greatest in college hoops.
Greg does such an incredible job taking a look at this great sport, and it has been Portal Mania, as they like to call it, Portal Combat right now, with so many guys coming to different schools. Greg has been on top of it all, and every single time he joins this podcast, lends such great insight. So a big thanks to Greg for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, I give you a roundup of the news and notes that we've seen in college basketball for the last 24 hours. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by our good friend Greg Waddell, who does great work over at Sleepers Media. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and did so once again today. So a big thanks to Greg for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast that I give you a recap of the news and notes in college basketball that we've seen over the last 24 hours. This one is one that I forgot to touch upon on the podcast yesterday, but the Racers of Murray State, they are going to be bringing in J.J. Traynor. He was over at DePaul this last season. Solid guy, was able to give the team about 5.5 points per contest, and 6'9". He's tried to pop it from 3 in the past, has not been able to give you really anything from 3-point range, but about 3.5 rebounds per game. Murray State was a team that was interesting on the glass last year. They didn't allow a lot of offensive rebounds for their opponents, but they themselves necessarily a, shall we say, solid force down low either, so we shall see what is going to be happening on that front, but that's a pretty solid pickup for Murray State. I feel like this is a pretty solid pickup as well, as you've got Butler transfer Bowden Kempke. He last season over at Butler at 6'11", was able to give the team about 3 boards, 4 points per contest, has a little bit of upside. He's going to be heading to Boston College, and good grief, does Boston College need help, because last year that was less than tremendous for them, and for Boston College ever since they lost Quentin Post. That has been just massive issues for them in general, so this is a much needed pickup for them. That should be able to help them out a little bit more moving forward, and I take a look at this, and I think that it's not really too surprising, as Ashton Hardaway, he was over at St. Mary's this last season, really didn't get out there on the floor too much for St. Mary's. His father, as you know, is Penny Hardaway. He's going to be going back to Memphis. Now, it's not like he saw a bunch of playing time when he was over at Memphis to start with, but now he's seen a little bit more of the, shall we say, wars of the college basketball season. Perhaps he's going to warrant a few more minutes. Staying 6'8", has a propensity to be able to pop it from 3-point range, but it's not necessarily a sharpshooter. He's able to give you a little bit on the glass as well. Certainly not quite what Penny Hardaway was once back in the day, but that said, he's going to be joining Dante Harris along Conte Berry, who comes over from Temple, as guys that are going to be entering into the program. So that's a good pickup and a reuniting there. For USC, they're going to be looking to get a little bit stronger down low. Gabe Dines, he was second in college basketball in blocks per game last season. He was over at Youngstown State with the Penguins, 6.8 points, 5.8 boards, 3.1 blocks per contest. He's going to be joining Eric Musselman's team over there at USC. And for USC, it's been very interesting the way that they have been playing the portal process here, as this bunch has been looking to be able to get a little bit more size than Marion Dixon. He was a relatively good shot blocker last season. He's heading on over there. Jacob Kofi, he was a big man over at Virginia. He's going to be entering into the fold. Keontae Jones, Jaden Brownell, these are sort of Swiss Army knife guys. They're going to be joining the program as well. So really do like what they've been able to do in terms of hitting the transfer portal line. It's very clear that they're going to be going big heavy under Eric Musselman for this upcoming season. And Jalen Smith, he's someone that is not so big, but he is going to be looking to be a nimble force over there at ETSU. Last season over at North Florida for the mighty Osprey, about 11.5 points, a little bit over a steal per contest. guy that's able to do a nice job of doling out the ball, 5.7 assists per game. 3-point shooting left a little bit of something to be desired, but that's going to be a relatively good pickup for ETSU, team that is going to be in a bit of transition out there in the backcourt. You've got Keon Edejiri. He was over at Northern Kentucky this last season. 7.5 points per contest, 5.5 boards, a little bit over a block and a half per contest. He heads on over to Rhode Island. For Rhode Island, they did a solid job on the glass last season, but they're losing a lot of those guys from a year ago, and let's call it what it is. It just has not necessarily been working out for Rhode Island thus far. They had a really nice on-conference portion of the season, then things went straight down the toilet bowl during conference play, so going to be very curious to see what happens there. And I mean, this is not a guy that was necessarily tearing it up out there in the Horizon League either, so what sort of minutes he's going to be getting is CBD, because Jonah Hinton along with RJ Johnson are also going to be entering in for Rhode Island, so I think that they're going to be an interesting team moving forward, and we'll see what else they're going to be able to get moving forward. Ephraim Johnson, he was over at UAB this past season. He was sort of a part-time starter, part-time guy that came in off the bench. He was able to supply UAB with 9 points per contest. Now, UAB was a little bit lackluster on the defensive side of things. They were one of the better offensive teams in all of college basketball, and for Johnson, he shot about 32% from three-point range. I can't think that he's going to be seeing a whole heck of a lot of minutes with Clemson, but you do never ever know. He had some good performances towards the back half of the season, so we'll be seeing what happens there. And Aiden Mahaney, he's right now out there in the transfer portal as well. He was over at UConn this last season. Seems like he might be heading back on over to the West Coast, so we will see what is going to be happening on that front. We do know that Justin Bailey is going to be heading on over to Georgia. Last season he was at Wofford, 9.5 points per contest, shot 45.5% from three-point range. He didn't take a lot of threes and was a little bit of a one-trick pony. He did give the team a little bit over a steal per contest, so that was a little bit helpful, but still, this is going to be a very interesting move to say the least, as for Georgia, they were a bit lackluster in terms of their three-point shooting. That is going to be able to help them out a ton, and this is going to be helpful for Utah. They're going to be looking to restock down low, as they are losing a few of their guys from the post from a season ago, and James Okonkwo, who was rock solid over at Akron, actually began his career over at West Virginia along North Carolina as well, so that this, I believe, is school number 4 from him. Last season, he gave the team 6.9 points, a little bit over 7 boards, a block per contest. He's going to be heading on over to Utah. This should be able to fit the new system that they're going to be looking to do with the Utes, so I do like that pickup. And I do like this pickup as well. Virginia Tech's Ryan Jones Jr., he has decided that he is going to be going to Old Liberty Bibberty. He only saw 5 games of action this past season. He's a 6'8" guy that is able to pop it from three-point range. He's able to give you a little bit of versatility. Liberty always loves playing that positionless basketball. They always have a guy that's like 6'6" or taller that's able to handle the ball. I don't know if he's necessarily going to do amazing at handling the ball, but I think that he's got the ability to be able to be a little bit of a force multiplier out there on the floor, so I think that that's a great pickup for them. Brandon Rechsteiner was over at Virginia Tech last season, and he's decided that he is going to be going to Colorado. He pretty much got thrusted into the point guard role because it was supposed to be Heisey Miller last year for Virginia Tech. Unfortunately, he was involved in a gambling scandal, so he put up about 3 assists, 7 points per contest. Not a guy that necessarily lights you up from three-point range. Got better as the season went along, and he was able to see good minutes out there in the ACC at the point guard spot, so that's certainly going to be able to help out Colorado State. And Ali Farouk, he's going to be getting a rock solid pickup there, so you do have to like that. You've got Julian Musgrave. He was over at South Alabama this last season, about 2.5 assists per contest. Now, he did not see any playing time during the 2024-25 season. That was during the 2023-24 campaign. A guy that at 6'10" was serving as almost a little bit of a point forward, as he was able to give the team right around about 7 points per contest. He's going to be heading on over to Omaha. Omaha did not really have a lot of size down low. They had a lot of sharpshooters that were lighting things ablaze from three-point range, so I'm going to be very curious to see how he's going to be able to fit into that system, but that'll give them a little bit of a new wrinkle. Jaden Daughtry, he last season was over at Indiana State. At 6'7", was able to supply the team with 13 points, a little bit over 4 rebounds per game, one of the few guys that was able to hit the glass for the team. He's now going to be attending Richmond for the Itsy Bitsy Spiders, and Richmond always has one of those guys that's 6'7" or taller that does a little bit of everything. Now, Daughtry was not necessarily a guy that doled out the ball, but we've seen that with a few guys that have come in that have been able to give the team a little bit of facilitation, like a Jonathan Beagle last season coming in from Albany. He sort of fits that mold. We're going to see how Richmond is going to be able to function in terms of that backcourt, as that was a big giant issue for them last season, but it very much fits the mold, and I think that's going to be big for them. You've got Lawan Watts, who was over at Washington State this last season, as He was averaging 13.5 points, shot 55% from the floor, 6.5 rebounds per game. He is going to be heading on over to Texas Tech. Just a great pickup in general, and he's going to be able to fit the Grant McCasland system. Guy that's saying 6'7" is able to do a really nice job of stretching the floor, but yet still do a solid job on the glass. Last year shot 42.5% from three-point range. Absolutely love what he's able to bring to the table, so that is a very good one for Texas Tech. Dre Gibbs, Lawhorn, he was last season was over at Illinois, and he was solid. He gave the team 6 points per contest. Not necessarily a great three-point shooter, because frankly, nobody was a great three-point shooter on Illinois last season. He's heading on over to UNLV, and for Josh Pastner, he's starting to hit the ground running as the Running Rebels' new coach. As for UNLV, they've got a lot of shoes to fill in terms of the guys that did hit the transfer portal, but this is a good place for them to be able to start. They're also going to be bringing in a guy in Al Green, who over at Louisiana Tech a few seasons ago was a solid three-point shooter, and Emmanuel Stephen, who is a 7-footer that was over at Arizona last season. Just didn't really see a lot of playing time, but there's a little bit of untapped potential there, so going to be very interesting to see what he's going to be able to bring to the table. Going to be interesting to see what this man is going to be able to bring to the table as well. Themis Folks, he was over at UW-Milwaukee this past season. Prior to that, he was over at Louisiana. He was in the top 25 in assists per game this past season with 6 assists per contest, 14.5 points, steal and a half per contest, low to mid 30s three-point shooter. He is going to be going to Central Florida, and Central Florida is just on a run of being able to add guards. They added George Beal, a nice shooter from Hampton. Jordan Burks, he was over at Georgetown last season as well, so this is a completely revamped UCF backcourt. Now, for UCF, when they were really able to come into their own, they were very rock solid down low. We're going to see what they're going to be able to add there, but certainly a nice pickup on that front end. For Baylor, it seems like they're going to want to be a little bit stronger down low this season. Jocelyn Bodu, he was over at High Point. He's not going to be a low point this year. He comes on over to Baylor, and at 7 feet tall last year, blocking half per contest, 8.5 rebounds, limited offensively, only about 5.5 points per contest, but he was a 2-time all-conference defensive player, so you do have to like what he's going to be able to add there. And for Baylor, does seem like there's going to be a little bit of a change in philosophy on that front. And then you've got Jaden Johnson, who was over at Old Dominion this past season, 8.5 points, 3.5 assists per contest. Not a guy that's necessarily going to light you up from three. Old Dominion just did not have any three-point shooting whatsoever. He's going to be adding on over to LaSalle. For LaSalle, obviously trying to turn the page on the Fran Dunphy days, but we will see what else they're going to be able to add to that moving forward. Sean Phillips Jr., he was this last season over at Arizona State. Pretty solid down low. Gave the team a block per contest, 5.5 points, 5 boards. He's decided that he's going to be going to Missouri. Missouri, we notice, has been still going very much guard-oriented, but they're adding a few more big men. They were much more rock solid on the glass this past season with having March Mitchell in the fold, so it feels like Dennis Gates really doing a nice job of being able to find his bearings at Missouri. I do think that this is a solid pickup because Phillips was a part of an Arizona State team that was relatively up-tempo. It's not like they were playing at warp speed and quite Missouri-level pace, but still, they were playing relatively up-tempo. I think that he's going to do a nice job fitting in with this program, and we also are going to be bringing in Luke Norweather. He was over at Oklahoma this past season, and he's 6'11", and Javon Porter is a guy that very much is able to stretch the floor as well. So solid pickup for Missouri. He's done a nice job hitting the portal with also bringing in Sebastian Mack from UCLA as well. Jackson Fields, he last season was playing over at Troy. He's heading on over to West Virginia. So we're noticing a lot of mid-major guys heading on over to West Virginia to play under Mr. Coach Hoge, who was over at North Texas this past season. And for Fields, he was able to give the team about 8 points per contest, 5 boards, solid at being able to generate turnovers. I don't know what sort of impact he's going to be able to make at West Virginia. That's a big leap up for a guy that, let's call it what it is. He wasn't like a primary guy over at Troy or anything like that, but still, I do think that he's going to be able to come in and he's going to be able to give this team a little bit of a shot in the arm. And Zach Clemens, he, the past few seasons, has been on the bench for Kansas. Was supposed to go to UC Santa Barbara a few seasons ago, got brought back to Kansas, never really saw any playing time. At 6'11", not a guy that's going to light you up from three or anything like that, but he's being added to Texas A&M. I just frankly don't know what we're going to be able to see out of him because he doesn't necessarily fit the Bucky McMillan style, but at the same time, for Bucky McMillan, he might realize that he needs a little bit more on the glass to be able to compete out there in the SEC. So very curious pickup there. So I'm very, shall we say, fascinated as to what we're going to be seeing on that front. And it's going to be interesting to see what we're going to be able to get on this front as well, as we've got Matt Reed transferring on over to Iona. He was over at Tulsa this last year, was averaging about 3.5 points, 2.5 rebounds per game, has a propensity to shoot it relatively okay from three-point range. Bigger pickup, though, is Deweek Telveris. He was over last season at Charleston, 2 seasons ago at Delaware State, averaged 13 points, 2.5 assists, steal per contest, shot 42% from three-point range. Really good pickup for Loyola Chicago. For Loyola Chicago, they're getting a nice two-way player. He was over at Delaware State where he was able to light it up there, is familiar with being a bit more of a do-it-all sort of guy. And for Loyola Chicago, I think the big question mark is what are they going to be able to have to go around him. And for Loyola Chicago, will they do a little bit of a better job on the defensive glass, because that's always a forte of theirs. They're a team that they very much pride themselves on not allowing other teams to be able to get second and third chances. I do think that that is going to be coming back for them a little bit as Loyola Chicago is starting to get going with the transfer portal. We'll see what else they're going to be adding here to come in the next few weeks. And then Roddy Brown Jr., he was over at Virginia Tech. He's decided that he's going to be going to the Mount of Loyola Marymount, average about 4 points per contest, and did begin his career at Cal where he really didn't play at all. But this is going to be a nice pickup for a Loyola Marymount team that they do need a little bit more versatility. They lose Javon Porter via the transfer portal, so that'll be able to help them out quite a bit. And after Sean Montgomery had a little bit of a tough go of it last season over at Georgia, missed about half the season due to injury. 2 seasons ago when he was over at Mount St. Mary's, was averaging about 13 points, 2 assists, mid-30s three-point shooter. This past year shot well below 30% from three with 6.5 points per contest. He's heading on over to Dayton. Now, Dayton, they had 2 big-time transfers last season. Zed Key along with Posh Alexander. Both of those guys just complete and utter flopperoonie, but I do think that for Dayton, this one is going to be a little bit different for them moving forward, and I do think that that is going to be very helpful on that front. And then Bryson Corkley, he last season was over at George Mason. He has decided that he's going to be heading to Elon. Just really didn't see a lot of playing time as a 6'6" freshman. Came in with a little bit of fanfare as a mid-major guy that could be able to make a bit of an impact. Guy that's able to shoot it relatively solid from three-point range. Has some sneaky handles to him as well. So we'll be seeing what he's going to be able to get on that front. And then you've got the UNC Wilmington big man in Patrick Wetzler. He was averaging 4 points per contest and has decided that he is going to be going to UNC Wilmington. For UNC Wilmington, Harlan Obia, he was last season really good for them, and he came on over from Niagara. Now, when he was at Niagara, he saw a bunch of minutes. This is a guy that when he was at Virginia Tech this past season, really didn't see a ton of burn. That said, I do think that he's going to be able to do a nice job fitting the system, and if he can be the replacement for Obia, that would be massive for them. Kareem Rozier this past season spent it over at Duquesne, where he was averaging about 6.5 points per contest, threw in there a little bit over 3 assists per game as well. Now, for Duquesne, they had a little bit of a tough time guarding the three-point arc, but he's going to be heading on over to Winthrop. Winthrop is a bunch that plays quite a bit more up-tempo than what we saw over at Duquesne this last season, and for Rozier last year, shot only about 31.5% from three-point range. We saw him in his first 2 years at Duquesne shoot more like 38 to 39% from three-point range, so that should be able to help out this Winthrop team a little bit more. And Winthrop was terrible at the free throw line this last season, so if absolutely nothing else, should be able to help out on that front. It's also a Winthrop team that turned the ball over perhaps a little bit too much. Should be able to help clean things up a little bit more on that front. This should be able to clean things up as well for ETSU. As ETSU, they're getting another ad. I was talking about the fact that they added in the guard from North Florida a little bit before, and now they're adding in there Blake Barkley. He was over at Northwestern at 6'7". He redshirted this past season, but has a little bit of versatility. Should be able to help them out quite a bit moving forward, and he is coming on over along Jalen Smith. I was springing on the name there for a second, so that is going to be a nice, helpful pickup for them. So they've had a nice 24 to 48 hours. Austin Schwartz saw some relatively solid minutes for the Miami Hurricanes this last season as a freshman. He was able to put up about 6 points per contest. He's going to be going on over to Creighton. Now for Creighton, this team is bringing in quite a bit already. Owen Freeman, who is a dominant big man over at Iowa, along Josh Schicks, the sharpshooter for them. They're going to be coming on over. Nick Graves, the top scorer over at Charlotte, he's going to be added as well. So I have to think that Schwartz is going to be a little bit of a depth piece. And here becomes a question with Creighton. Will they actually play more than 5 guys this year? Because if they can add a little bit more in terms of the bench, and if they're able to add just a little bit more in general in terms of just versatility, I think that that would be able to do a lot of good for them. And I'm looking at you, St. Bonaventure, in terms of doing that as well, but I do think that that's a relatively solid pickup for them. Austin Ball, he has decided that he is going to be going to IU Indy after he was more of a depth piece for George Mason this last year at 6'7", was able to give the team about 2.5 points. He saw about 10 minutes per game. Relatively good player on the defensive side of things because, quite frankly, everyone on George Mason was able to play some relatively solid defense. Not a guy that necessarily has a ton of versatility from three-point range this past season. Shot about 32.5% from the outside, so we'll see what he's able able to bring to the table, but that's a relatively helpful pickup for them. And then you've got a transfer in Harlan Woods, who was over at Northeastern this last season. He's decided that he's going to go to Incarnate Word. Incarnate Word actually has some very surprisingly deep pockets, as he last season was able to give the team about 12 points, 7 boards, 2.5 assists, a little bit over a steal per contest at 6'5". That's a really good pickup for Incarnate Word, so do love what they're able to bring to the table, and have to love the fact that Texas Tech, along with LaJuan Watts, they're going to be bringing in Donovan Atwell as well. He's another 40% three-point shooter, 13 points, 3.5 assists per game, was rock solid in the backcourt of UNC Greensboro this past season, and I think that he's going to be able to go in there, make an immediate impact. This one was surprising a little bit. Trey Holloman, who he's right now taking a look at a lot of different options. He has decided that he is going to go into NC State. Will Wade getting to work already for these guys? He this past season was a big part of the reason why Michigan State was able to make that Elite Eight run. 9 points, 3.5 assists, really good defensive player. Well, that's something to be desired in terms of three-point shooting, but him going on over to NC State already, Mr. Wade is getting to work, and it hasn't necessarily been volume transfers at this point for NC State, but right now they're looking a little bit more for the quality transfers, as Alan Breed and Kadir Copeland are going to be falling on over from McNeese. You figured that was going to be the case. We'll see if any more of those McNeese guys come on over, but so far so good for Mr. Wade in the portal. And Carson Tout, he was one of the top rebounders in all of college basketball, 13.5 points, north of 12 rebounds per contest. As a matter of fact, the top rebounder in the country, 3.5 assists, 6'8", little bit of point forward for Northern Arizona. He's going to be heading on over to Notre Dame. Going to be interesting to see what Micah Shrewsbury does with him, because Shrewsbury's system is always very guard oriented, so that I think is going to be of intrigue. This I think is of intrigue as well. John Camden, he was over at Delaware this last season, where he gave the team 17 points at 6'8"-ish. He shot 41% from 3-point, was the only guy that could grab a rebound for the team. He has decided that he is going to be going to Cal. This has been a Cal bunch that has brought in some nice pieces over the last few seasons, just has not really been able to materialize for them, and Cal has just been in the abyss of college basketball for quite a while, but they brought in a lot of guys already. Dede Ames is coming on over from Virginia, Milos Ilitch from Loyola of Maryland, and Justin Pittman from Michigan as well. So they've done a lot of work in the portal, and we'll see if this is going to be a move that's going to be panning out for them. And then you saw Zach Bell, who was over at Jacksonville this last season, averaged 9 points, a steal and a half per contest, relatively good three-point shooter. He's heading on over to a Southern Utah team that, boy, oh boy, do they need some guard play from a season ago. And what we need is to just keep on looking at what we're all getting in college basketball in general, because we've got north of 2,100 players in the transfer portal, and I'm going to try to keep it all straight for you guys right here on this podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNet_D1. Keep in mind, Larry M, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks once again to Greg Waddell, aka G Wizzy, over there at Sleepers Media for joining me in the last segment. Coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, so I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.